They gave me a dry piece of bread. At a 5-star wedding, my sister's wedding. That's all they thought I deserved. My mother leaned over in her pearl necklace and smiled with poison in her voice. This is enough for you. My sister. The glowing bride passed by with her designer heels, glanced at my table and whispered, pathetic. As always, I was seated alone. No place card, no wine, no name on the guest list even. Just that stale piece of bread. I had one of two choices. Walk out quietly and cry in the bathroom like they expected me to. Or remind them exactly who they were dealing with. So I waited. Through the ceremony, through the fake speeches about love and unity. And when the mic was passed around, I stood up. Calmly. I said, let's watch something special, shall we? The lights dimmed. The screen lit up. And with one click, everything began to crumble. What played wasn't just a video. It was a confession, a betrayal, a secret they thought I'd never discover. My sister's hands started shaking. My mother gasped. The groom froze. The guests stared. And the next 3 minutes changed everything. You think this is just another family drama? No. This is the truth behind a perfect wedding. And what happens when the quiet one decides not to stay quiet anymore? Stay with me. Because this isn't about revenge, it's about justice. And it's only getting started. Iris Whitmore was 38 years old and had lived alone in a modest third-floor apartment in Brooklyn for the past decade. She was a photographer, not the glamorous kind who shot fashion spreads or high-society weddings, but a quiet observer of life. Her lens sought truth in the mundane, wrinkled hands holding coffee cups, eyes that had seen war children laughing in worn-out sneakers. It wasn't flashy work, but it was honest. And in a world of appearances, Iris had learned to find dignity in honesty. She rarely spoke about her family, not because of some estrangement born from anger, but because silence was often more bearable than the judgment she knew too well. She sat in her small studio that afternoon editing a portrait of an elderly couple who'd been married 50 years. As the soft winter light spilled through the window, her mind drifted not to the warmth of the image in front of her, but to a photo that didn't exist. Her own family portrait. Iris had always been the other daughter, the one who didn't have Delaney's perfect jawline or her ease with strangers. While Delaney posed for pageant photos and bathed in applause at ballet recitals, Iris watched from backstage, sometimes holding flowers, more often forgotten altogether. Evelyn, their mother, used to say Delaney was born to shine. Iris, dear, you're more of a shadow, necessary but best when quiet. Even as a child, Iris understood what that meant. On her 10th birthday, she had waited with wide eyes and a party hat, hoping someone would show up to the little park Evelyn had told her to wait in. No one did. She waited over an hour before realizing that Evelyn had taken Delaney to a modeling audition across town, having completely forgotten the birthday picnic. Iris walked home alone that day, holding the untouched cupcakes in her lap on the subway. Years later, on the day of her high school graduation, she wore a borrowed white dress and stood scanning the crowd after the ceremony. Parents laughed and cried, hugged their kids, handed them roses. Iris stood alone on the curb until her friend Julie's father offered to drive her home. Evelyn and Reginald never came. They had gone to Delaney's magazine photo shoot instead. We thought your graduation was tomorrow, Evelyn had explained later with a thin smile, as if that erased the absence. Now, as she sat staring at the half-finished photo on her screen, Iris stood up and walked to the hallway where her parents' Christmas card from last year still hung on the bulletin board. In it, Evelyn and Reginald smiled with Delaney and her fiancé Jasper seated in front of a grand fireplace. Everyone wore coordinated cream and navy. Iris was not in the photo. She never had been, not in any of the family's holiday greetings sent out over the years. There were no raised voices in the Whitmore house growing up. There was no slamming of doors or dramatic exits. The exclusion was polite, intentional, and chillingly consistent. Evelyn believed in decorum above all else. If Iris didn't fit the narrative she wanted to show the world, she was edited out gently but thoroughly. Reginald never protested. He was a man of few words, preferring to spend his evenings with newspapers and investor calls rather than with his daughters. When he did speak, his words carried the tone of a boardroom, not a living room. Delaney, for her part, was never cruel in the way children are often cruel. She didn't mock Iris or fight with her. She simply ignored her. As if Iris existed in a parallel orbit close enough to be seen too insignificant to affect her world. The only photos Iris had of the two of them were from early childhood, before Delaney learned she could be the center of attention without sharing the frame. That afternoon, Iris opened her closet and took down a small box of prints she'd never shown anyone. One by one, she pulled out the photo snapshots from their family home, the edge of a kitchen table where Evelyn sat sipping wine, the empty hallway outside Reginald's office, Delaney's pageant crown glinting on a windowsill. None of them were portraits. They were observations. Quiet, distant, but hauntingly intimate. It was her way of remembering what it felt like to be there and never truly be seen. She set the box down and looked at her calendar. A red circle around Saturday. Delaney's wedding. She hadn't decided whether to go. The envelope had arrived a week earlier. Thick paper gold lettering addressed not as Dear Sister or even Iris Whitmore, but to Ms. Iris Whitmore. No note inside, no phone call. Just the invitation and a silent reminder you are still not really part of this family, but your absence would be noticed, and that would be inconvenient. Iris stared at it now, still lying open on her desk. The rational part of her wanted to stay home, avoid the theater of it all. But another part, deeper, quieter, and long ignored, stirred. Maybe it was time to show up. Not for them, for herself. The envelope was thick and impossibly elegant, the kind of weight that announced prestige before it was ever opened. Iris found it in her mailbox 2 days after she had decided reluctantly that she would attend. She didn't need to guess who it was from. The gold-embossed monogram D&J on the front with a swirling flourish that reminded her of a luxury perfume ad made it painfully obvious. Delaney always had a flair for drama, even in paper. She brought it inside, set it on her small dining table, and stared at it for a long moment before sliding a letter opener through the seal. The card inside was stiff, pristine, printed on ivory, with foil-stamped gold lettering that shimmered faintly in the morning light. The Whitmore and Langston families cordially invite you to celebrate the wedding of Delaney Marie Whitmore and Jasper Elliott Langston. The ceremony would be held at the historic Baystone Grand Hotel in Boston, followed by a reception in the Versailles Ballroom. Black tie. Champagne only. Iris leaned back and exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that escapes not from surprise but from something deeper, resignation. Of course it would be held at the Baystone. That place was practically a shrine for Boston's upper class, where every marble tile and gold-trimmed chair screamed legacy. And of course it would be Jasper. The Langstons were old money generations of polished teeth and silent power. Delaney had always known how to climb. She just made sure her heels never touched the ground. Her phone rang within minutes. It was Evelyn. Iris. Her mother's voice came through smooth and clipped. I assume you received the invitation. I did. Well then, please try to dress appropriately this time. It's a formal wedding, not a gallery opening. Iris let the silence stretch before answering. You don't have to worry. I'll blend right in with the wallpaper. Evelyn didn't laugh. She never did at sarcasm that didn't serve her. Delaney's wedding is an important event for our family. The Langstons are not people we want to offend. I'm not the one marrying into their family. Iris replied more quietly than she intended. You're still representing us. Just don't embarrass anyone. And no denim this time. Iris almost reminded her that she had worn denim only once, and that had been after a 10-hour train ride to make it in time for Christmas dinner. But what was the point? Evelyn had already ended the call. Later that afternoon, while sorting through prints for a client, Iris's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Delaney. The tone, as always, was breezy, an effortless mix of warmth and passive command. Hey, sis. So excited you're coming. Quick favor, would you mind snapping a few pics during the reception? Nothing fancy. Just candid moments, you know. You've got the best eye. And we figured since you're family, it'd be super meaningful. And free, of course. Ha ha. Iris stared at the screen. She could almost hear the way Delaney's voice would rise slightly on the word free, as though it was a joke, as though it wasn't entirely expected. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. For a moment she considered declining outright, but she knew what that would trigger. A call from Evelyn, a passive-aggressive tirade about selfishness, about how you never do anything for your sister, even though she's always included you. It would turn into a conversation Iris had already played out in her mind 100 times. So she replied politely but firmly. I appreciate the thought, but I'd like to attend as a guest this time. Delaney never responded. That evening, the sun dipped below the Brooklyn skyline in a wash of amber and steel. Iris was pouring tea when her phone rang again. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. Ms. Whitmore. This is Sylvia Renner's assistant. I'm calling on behalf of Clarion Gallery. Her heart skipped. We're pleased to inform you that your work has been selected for our spring showcase Portraits of Solitude. Sylvia loved your submissions. She said your eye is unflinching. For a moment, Iris couldn't speak. She had submitted that series almost a year ago, intimate raw portraits of people caught in quiet reflection. It had felt like a long shot, something she did more for herself than for recognition. And now, out of nowhere, an invitation. Thank you. She managed her voice barely steady. That's incredible. You'll be receiving the formal confirmation by email, but Ms. Renner said to let you know personally. She believes you have something rare. When the call ended, Iris stood still in the center of her apartment, hand pressed against her chest, as though trying to keep the moment inside her. She picked up her phone and, despite herself, called her mother. It rang 3 times before Evelyn answered. Hello, hi, Mom, Iris said. I just wanted to share something. I got accepted into Clarion's spring show. Sylvia Renner herself chose my work. There was a pause just long enough to leave a bruise. That's nice, Iris. Listen, I'm in the middle of finalizing some seating plans for the wedding. Can we talk later? The line went dead. Iris lowered the phone slowly, then placed it down without a sound. A golden wedding. A golden opportunity. 2 invitations, one handwritten in art and effort, the other mass-printed and sealed in silence. She knew which one mattered more. The Baystone Grand gleamed beneath a pale winter sky, its towering facade flanked with white columns and gold-trimmed doors that glinted in the morning sun. Iris stepped out of the hired town car, her emerald green dress brushing against her calves as a cold gust swept through the hotel courtyard. The dress was modest, no sequins, no lace, just clean lines and quiet elegance like everything Iris chose. She adjusted the strap of her purse, steadying herself before walking through the ornate revolving doors. Inside, guests milled about the cathedral-style lobby, all dressed in layers of wealth, men in tuxedos, women in designer heels that clicked against the marble floors. Conversations floated in the air, crisp with laughter and polite compliments. Iris stood quietly, eyes scanning the floral arrangements that trailed up the grand staircase. White lilies. Of course. Delaney always liked symbolism, especially when it made her look innocent. A young woman in a black headset approached her with a clipboard and a rehearsed smile. Miss Whitmore, welcome. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your table. Iris nodded and followed her heels soft against the carpeted hall as they passed the glittering ballroom entrance. She assumed her seat would be near the back. She wasn't naive, but when the attendant led her down a narrow corridor past the main reception doors and toward a far corner near the emergency exit, she felt her stomach sink. Here you are, the woman said, gesturing toward a round table set for one. A single name card sat in front of an empty plate. Iris Whitmore. The table was tucked beside a coat rack and a glowing red exit sign. It was removed just enough from the main room to feel forgotten, but close enough to still hear the string quartet playing inside. The other tables were adorned with candles, gold-trimmed menus, crystal glasses. Her table had none of it. Iris sat down slowly, adjusting the hem of her dress over her lap. She noticed it then, a small porcelain plate placed at the center of her setting. On it, a single piece of dry bread. No butter, no garnish, no explanation. She blinked. Surely it was a mistake. She looked around, searching for a server. Instead, she saw Evelyn. Her mother glided toward her like a swan through still water, dressed in silver satin and pearls, her hair in a flawless chignon. She wore a smile that never quite touched her eyes. "Darling," Evelyn said with syrup in her voice, "so glad you could make it. You look comfortable." Iris met her gaze but said nothing. Evelyn leaned in slightly, lowering her voice just enough to remain inaudible to passers-by. "I see you've found your place. With your career in freelance photography, I imagine this meal is rather appropriate. Simple. Humble." Her hand gestured toward the bread like she was presenting a delicacy. "This is what you're used to, isn't it?" Iris's jaw tightened, but she kept her face still. Her mother stood there a moment longer, then turned and walked away without waiting for a reply. A few minutes later, the music shifted. Delaney appeared near the ballroom entrance in her custom wedding gown, a cascade of satin and hand-stitched lace. She was stunning, radiant, the picture of composed grace. The crowd inside erupted in polite applause. As the bride made her rounds, she eventually floated toward the far end of the corridor. When she reached Iris's table, she tilted her head with the sweetness of someone offering condolences at a funeral. "Hello, big sister," Delaney said, her lips curling into a delicate smile. "You made it." "I did." Delaney glanced at the plate, then at the chair, then back at Iris. "Your dress. Charming. Very minimalist." There was a long pause. "You know," she added, lowering her voice, "I always admired how you managed to make everything look so affordable. It's a gift. You make even the most ordinary things look cheaper." Iris stared at her. "You've never really understood presentation, have you?" Still, Iris said nothing. Instead, she reached into her small handbag and slowly pulled out a small black USB stick. She didn't raise it in defiance, didn't wave it like a threat. She simply placed it in her lap, thumb resting lightly on its smooth surface. Delaney's smile faltered for the briefest second. "Well," she said, voice tightening, "enjoy the evening." Iris nodded. Delaney turned and walked back into the ballroom, her train catching briefly on the leg of a gilded chair before it snapped free. Left alone at her table beside the fire exit, Iris looked once more at the dry piece of bread on the plate before her. She didn't touch it. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the ballroom lights and waited. Not for food, not for conversation, but for the moment when silence would mean more than anything her family had ever spoken aloud. The coldness of that bread hadn't left Iris's mind, not its dryness, not the silence that came with it. As she sat alone near the fire exit, her fingers curled lightly around the small black USB in her lap, she felt the weight of a decision that had been days in the making, whether or not she would ever use what she had captured. And now, in the quiet just before the speeches, her mind drifted back to the night it all began to take shape. It had been 3 weeks earlier at the Langston family's private engagement party for Delaney and Jasper. Hosted in the rooftop lounge of an elite hotel overlooking Boston Harbor, the event had been less a celebration of love and more a display of legacy. Delaney had insisted that Iris bring her camera, not as a professional. "Of course," she'd said with a breezy laugh, just for a few candid shots to make Mom happy. Iris had shown up with her smaller rig more out of habit than obligation. She didn't want to make a scene, and she had long ago learned to choose her battles. Most of the night she stayed in the corners, capturing blurred moments through glassware, children chasing each other under the chandeliers, Jasper making polite rounds through guests who whispered his name like royalty. Iris knew how to be invisible, and she preferred it that way. Her lens gave her cover. Her silence gave her power. Toward the end of the evening, after most of the guests had moved to the open terrace to watch the fireworks, Iris had wandered back into the empty lounge to adjust her camera settings. That's when she saw Delaney alone near the bar phone lit up in her hand, her expression drawn tight. She didn't notice Iris behind the glass column. Iris, instinctively raising her camera, adjusted the focus not to photograph but to observe. Delaney was typing quickly, her brows furrowed, lips pressed. Then she paused, read something, and smiled. Iris couldn't see the full message, but as Delaney turned slightly, the screen came into view just enough for Iris's lens to catch a single line before it disappeared. Tonight. One last time. My bed. Not Jasper's. It was jarring, intimate, reckless. Delaney looked around and slipped her phone into her clutch, then headed toward the private elevator without a word. Iris hesitated only for a moment before following slowly, careful to stay out of sight. She had no intention of confronting her. She just wanted to know, to understand. The elevator doors closed behind Delaney, and Iris took the stairs 2 floors down, exiting discreetly into the underground parking structure. She knew Delaney's car, the silver coupe their father had bought her for graduation. It sat alone at the far end near the hotel's rear entrance. Iris waited in the shadows, camera slung at her side, breath shallow in the cold concrete air. Minutes passed. Then a black SUV pulled in and parked beside the coupe. The driver stepped out, a tall man in a fitted coat, clean-cut, confident. He looked familiar. Cole Maddox. One of Jasper's business contacts, if Iris remembered correctly. She'd seen him once at a charity function, charming and far too smooth for his own good. Delaney got out of her car and walked straight into his arms. There was no hesitation, no pretension. The kiss was slow, deep, familiar. Not the thrill of a new affair, something older, something worn in. Iris lifted her camera. She hadn't meant to, but her hands acted before her mind caught up. She switched to video mode and pressed record. She didn't zoom in. She didn't need to. It was enough to see what was happening. Enough to remember. They talked briefly. Delaney laughed softly, brushing his coat lapel, and then they disappeared into the back seat of the coupe. The door closed behind them. Iris stopped recording. She stood still for another minute, not moving, then walked away without looking back. She never showed anyone the footage. She told no one. For days afterward, she convinced herself it wasn't her place. Maybe Delaney had her reasons. Maybe it wasn't her job to ruin a wedding, no matter how cold the relationship between them had become. She had kept the clip on a backup drive, unnamed, buried beneath a dozen folders of client work. Until today. Until she arrived at her sister's wedding, wearing a quiet, carefully chosen dress, only to be seated near an exit like a stranger. Until her own mother walked by and dismissed her with a smile as if she hadn't raised her. Until her sister, wrapped in white lace and self-importance, stood over her with the audacity to insult her to her face. Until the dry bread. That was when she knew. Iris didn't see it as vengeance, not exactly. It wasn't rage that moved her. It was clarity. Years of being diminished, erased, laughed at. She didn't want a fight. She wanted a reckoning. And so as the orchestra finished their final prelude and the sound of silverware clinked in distant rhythms beyond the door, Iris closed her hand around the USB in her lap. The one that contained not only the video from the garage but the recording from the engagement party. Her camera had picked up more than she realized that night. Words, smirks, voices. It was all there, and tonight, everyone would see it. The day after the wedding rehearsal, the city of Boston moved with the hum of early spring, barely warm, but no longer frozen. Iris drove in silence toward the house she once called home. It was a pale blue colonial with stone steps and an iron gate tucked into a quiet neighborhood just outside the city. The trees in the yard had started to bud, and the magnolia bush that Evelyn always boasted about was beginning to bloom. Some things hadn't changed. She had come with a simple intention to speak privately with her father, Reginald. He had always been the quieter one, the one who didn't insult her dreams, even if he didn't support them either. There was a chance, however slim, that he might listen. That maybe he didn't know everything. That maybe, just maybe, he could still be reached. Parking at the end of the drive, Iris grabbed her bag phone and camera still with her from the wedding prep and walked to the side entrance. She knew the door code. Evelyn never bothered to change it. Inside, the house smelled like polished wood and lavender oil. Iris paused by the entryway, hearing voices drifting from the sunroom. She was about to call out when she caught her mother's name, then her own. Her steps slowed. "Don't worry." Evelyn's voice rang calm and clipped. "I've already moved the house, the condo in Martha's Vineyard, and the legacy shares into your name. Reginald has no idea." "You're sure?" Delaney's voice followed. "Because after the wedding I want things in motion fast. We can't afford for him to start poking around." "He won't," Evelyn said with conviction. "That man hasn't reviewed a financial document in 5 years. He still thinks our lawyer handles everything." There was the sound of a clink, perhaps a teacup on porcelain. Then quieter, but clear. "This is for us. For the women of this family. You've done more for our future with this marriage than Iris could have done in a lifetime with her little gallery shows." Iris felt her fingers tighten around the leather strap of her bag. Delaney gave a low laugh. "After I'm married, I'll be the one holding the pen. The accounts, the estate, the trust, everything. I'll make sure you're set, Mom. You can finally retire. No more pretending with Dad. No more coddling Iris. Let her stay in Brooklyn with her artistic life." Evelyn chuckled, a sound full of ice. "She won't last long. She's always been a phase, not a future." There was a long pause, broken only by the tapping of Delaney's fingers against glass. "Do you think she suspects anything?" she asked. "Suspect," Evelyn replied. "I doubt she's capable. She still thinks honesty means something. Poor thing probably thinks love and hard work are enough." This time both women laughed. Sharp. Certain. Iris didn't move. Her breath had gone shallow, and a dull throb built behind her temples. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket, tapped the recording app, and quietly hit record. Her hand trembled slightly, not from rage, but from the finality of it all. This wasn't just family cruelty. This was betrayal masked as legacy. Theft in a silk dress. She could hear Delaney pacing now. "I don't even love Jasper," she said more to herself. "But this is what power looks like. A Winston marriage, Mom. I'll be able to walk into any boardroom in Boston and have the room. You taught me that. Align yourself with advantage. Leave feelings at the door." "Exactly," Evelyn said, her voice filled with pride. "You learned well." And Iris Delaney added with a dry edge, "She's just background, like wallpaper. We keep her around so no one accuses us of being heartless. But after the wedding I say we cut the polite act." "I agree," Evelyn said smoothly. "No more invitations, no more forced holidays. She'll fade, and we'll flourish." Iris blinked back, the sting in her eyes, not from their words, but from the brutal honesty of it all. It wasn't jealousy she felt. It was clarity. Her mother and sister weren't merely thoughtless, they were architects of deceit. This wasn't just about Delaney's affair. This was about rewriting inheritance, silencing voices, and erasing anyone who didn't serve the narrative. She watched the recording meter tick upward 1 minute, 2, 3, until the conversation began to drift to brunch menus and honeymoon details. Then she slowly backed away, retracing her steps toward the side door. She didn't slam it. She didn't cry. She didn't even feel the weight of the betrayal yet. That would come later. For now, she had a recording. And soon, they'd have an audience. The ballroom shimmered with light as the orchestra finished its gentle interlude. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above tables dressed in white silk and gold-trimmed menus. Waitstaff moved in quiet choreography, refilling champagne glasses and clearing empty dessert plates. The air held that peculiar stillness just before formalities resumed. At the head table, Jasper stood and raised his glass with a broad smile, his father, Douglas Langston, beside him. The elder Langston, a man with a politician's voice and a banker's restraint, addressed the crowd with ease. "To family," Douglas said, pausing to let the clink of glassware echo in the silence. "To the joining of two legacies. To the future of Jasper and Delaney, may their union be as enduring as their names." Applause followed, warm and practiced. Then the MC returned to the microphone, flipping through a small stack of note cards. "Before we conclude the evening, we have one final toast. A special message from the bride's sister, Iris. There was a brief shuffle of surprise in the room. Delaney's smile faltered for the first time that evening. Evelyn, seated 2 seats away, stiffened slightly. Iris stood calmly. Her emerald green dress, simple yet dignified, caught a soft glint beneath the ballroom lights. She held no glass, no notes. Walking toward the front with slow, deliberate steps, she turned to face the guests. "I appreciate the opportunity," she began, her voice clear and even. "But I won't be offering a toast tonight." A murmur. Chairs creaked. Someone coughed. "I'm not here to offer blessings or rehearsed sentiment," she continued. "I came with something else, something more honest, something overdue." Delaney straightened in her seat. "What is she doing?" she whispered harshly to Evelyn. Iris held up a small black USB drive between her fingers and handed it to the technician near the stage. "I'd like to share a video," she said simply. "Please play it." The lights dimmed. The screen descended behind the head table. The room shifted from polite curiosity to restrained tension. Iris turned and stood to the side, her hands folded calmly in front of her. The first scene flickered to life, Delaney standing in the shadows of a parking structure, her coat draped over her arm, phone glowing in the dark. The message she read lit up in silence, blown up on the screen. "Tonight. One last time. My bed. Not Jasper's." Gasps scattered through the room. Then came the footage, grainy but clear enough, of Delaney and a man stepping into the back seat of her car, arms wrapped, lips locked. Some guests turned away. Others stared frozen. Jasper sat unmoving, his knuckles white against the tablecloth. The scene shifted. This time audio played. Evelyn's voice echoed through the speakers, precise and chilling. "I've already moved the house, the vineyard property, and the shares into your name." "Reginald has no idea," Delaney replied with a bitter chuckle. "After the wedding, everything's mine. You can retire, Mom. I'll take it from here." From the shadows of the crowd, Reginald Harrison rose slowly, his eyes locked on the screen. The ballroom had gone completely silent. Delaney stood suddenly. "Turn it off. Now." Her voice cracked in panic. "That's private. This is doctored. This is slander." But the video played on. Evelyn's laughter joined Delaney's, the sound of greed disguised as maternal pride, a blueprint for betrayal drawn out for all to see. Then, before the screen faded, a final voice echoed into the darkened ballroom. "That's enough," said a familiar voice. But it wasn't from the speakers. All heads turned as Cole Maddox, dressed in a dark suit, stepped forward from the side entrance. Real. Present. Not a recording. He moved toward the front of the room with calm precision. Delaney's eyes widened in disbelief, her complexion drained of all color. "What are you doing here?" Cole ignored her. He turned to the guests, to Jasper, to the Langston family, to everyone watching. "I was invited to the engagement party," he said. "I didn't know I was part of a game." She said it was one last night, nothing more. His voice remained steady. "But it became clear that I was just another tool, a man used to hurt another. I had a feeling she'd twist the story, so I recorded our conversations. I have everything, every message, every plan." Delaney began to shake her head furiously. "He's lying. He's obsessed with me." Cole looked at her for the first time that evening. "Delaney, I loved you once, briefly. But what you did to your sister, your father, your fiancé." He turned to Jasper. "You deserve the truth, not a performance." The screen went black. The lights returned. The ballroom remained silent. And in that silence, the truth finally stood taller than the decorations, the wealth, or the reputation they'd all fought to maintain. Jasper Langston didn't move for a moment. His fingers twitched slightly at his sides as the last echo of Cole Maddox's voice faded from the speakers. Around him, the wedding ballroom stood still, as though the ornate chandeliers themselves were holding their breath. Delaney had stopped crying, though her face was stained with blackened mascara, and her body hunched as if trying to hide from a world that had suddenly turned its back. Evelyn sat beside her, lips pressed into a bloodless line, eyes darting across the room like a cornered animal. And then Jasper stood. He didn't look at Delaney. He didn't look at the crowd. Instead, he reached slowly for his left hand and removed the platinum band he had placed on his finger not 2 hours ago. Holding it between his thumb and forefinger, he stared at it for a long moment. "I loved a lie in a white dress," he said quietly. His voice wasn't raised, but it rang out across the ballroom like a final bell. He placed the ring down gently on the linen-covered table and turned to his parents. Douglas Langston and his wife Elizabeth had remained composed during the entire scandalous unfolding, but now the steel in Douglas's jaw had hardened. He stood beside his son, tall and grim, and turned his eyes toward Evelyn Whitmore. This marriage, he said, was not just a personal union. It was a business alignment, one we considered sacred. But deceit is not a value we do business with. Evelyn opened her mouth to protest, but Douglas cut her off with a sharp glance. "As of this moment, the Langston Group withdraws from all pending and proposed partnerships with Whitmore Holdings. Effective immediately. Any outstanding negotiations are null." The words hit harder than anything Iris had said or shown. Gasps broke from the lips of several guests who worked in finance or society circles. They knew what this meant. The Whitmore name would take a fall not just socially, but financially, and fast. Delaney collapsed into her chair, hands covering her face. Jasper, without a word more, turned and walked away from the table, his mother following quietly, her hand on his shoulder. And then Evelyn broke. "This is your fault!" she screamed, rising so quickly her chair tipped behind her. "You—" she pointed a trembling manicured finger at Iris. "You orchestrated this circus. You ruined my daughter's wedding. You destroyed everything we built." But the crowd was no longer listening. Guests had begun to rise from their seats, collecting their purses, their coats, their dignity. Conversations murmured like wind in the trees, soft swirling but unmistakably moving in one direction. "She deserves better," one woman whispered as she passed Iris. "I had no idea Delaney was like that," a man muttered to his wife. No wonder Iris never came to the holidays. No one looked at Evelyn. "Sit down," she barked. At no one. "This isn't over." Her voice cracked again, hoarse and shrill. "Do you know who we are?" "We are the Whitmores." No one answered. The orchestra had long stopped playing. The only sound was the rustle of dresses, the scrape of chairs, the slow, echoing footsteps of guests who had seen enough. Iris stood still, her hands calmly at her sides, her eyes focused on nothing in particular. The silence felt heavier now, not out of shame, but out of finality. She didn't feel victorious. She felt unburdened. From the far end of the room, near the now darkened video screen, Reginald Harrison remained seated. He hadn't spoken a word since the video played. His tie was loosened, his eyes unfocused. But as the guests emptied the ballroom and the Whitmore name collapsed beneath the weight of its secrets, he finally turned to look at Iris. Their eyes met. He didn't speak, didn't offer comfort, apology, or anger, just a long, unreadable stare from a father who had just realized he'd built his family legacy on sand. And Iris, though she said nothing either, knew one thing clearly now. The fall had begun. The ballroom had emptied out, leaving only the faint scent of white roses and spiced candle wax lingering in the air. Servers moved quietly through the ruins of what had once been a picture-perfect wedding, clearing half-finished glasses of champagne and untouched slices of cake. In the distance, Evelyn's voice had long since fallen into silence, either by exhaustion or disbelief. Delaney was nowhere to be seen. Iris remained near the stage, her green dress now slightly wrinkled, her face still composed, though her soul trembled with everything that had just unraveled. She had not noticed the woman in the dark burgundy coat until the voice called her name, soft but firm. Iris Harrison. Iris turned, startled, to see a figure she hadn't seen in almost 2 years. Sylvia Renner stood tall, composed, her silver-gray bob neatly in place, and her black gloves still held in one hand, as if she'd just arrived from an art auction. She did not wear the awkward smile of a social guest, but the direct, appraising gaze of someone who had seen something they didn't expect. Sylvia, Iris said, barely masking her surprise. "I didn't know you were here." "I wasn't invited," Sylvia replied with a wry smile. "But someone close to me was." Word travels fast in art circles, especially when chaos is dressed in silk and scandal. Iris wasn't sure what to say. The last time they had spoken, Sylvia had delivered a rejection with her signature grace. "Your technical skills are sharp," she'd said at the time. "But I don't feel the soul in your work. I need rawness, something that dares to hurt." It had stung, even though Iris had nodded respectfully and thanked her. Now Sylvia looked around the disheveled ballroom. "I saw the video," she said without preamble. "I stood in the back, watched the whole thing." Iris lowered her eyes. "That wasn't supposed to be art." Sylvia's voice was quiet but carried the kind of certainty that made people stop walking. "It was. Whether you meant it or not. It was art. Raw. Painful. Brilliant. The kind of truth you can't curate. You didn't just expose their lies. You exposed yourself, your pain, your strength. That takes more than talent. It takes conviction." Iris blinked momentarily, speechless. 2 years ago, she finally said, "You told me my work was too polished, too distant." "I did," Sylvia said simply, "and I was right." Then, there was a beat of silence between them. And now Iris asked, not confrontational, just open. Sylvia stepped forward. "Now I'm looking at a woman who no longer hides behind composition and technique. I saw truth on that screen, and I want to show it to the world, if you're willing." Iris tilted her head, unsure whether she was imagining this offer. "I want to curate a solo exhibition." Sylvia continued, her voice warm but firm. "You're first. A full collection. We'll call it Behind the Curtain Portraits of Truth. Not just the wedding. Everything. The absence in your childhood. The invisibility in your family. The reclamation of your voice." Iris felt her breath catch in her throat. Of all the things she had prepared herself for after that night, the backlash, the blame, the shame, this was not among them. A door had opened in the middle of the ashes. "You're serious," she said softly. Sylvia met her eyes. "I don't waste time chasing flukes. What you showed today wasn't a moment. It was a culmination. And it deserves a stage." For a moment, Iris didn't answer. Her eyes drifted to the far end of the room where her father still sat alone, head bowed. The room no longer held her, not as a place of rejection, nor as a memory of pain. Now it was simply a space she had passed through on her way to something more. She turned back to Sylvia. "When do we begin?" she asked. Sylvia smiled. "We already have." The early morning light of Brooklyn carried a different kind of clarity than Boston's cold grandeur. Here the sun filtered through the windows of Iris's modest new studio, warming the exposed brick walls and casting gentle patterns across the polished wood floor. She had signed the lease only a week after returning from the wedding, moved by an urgency to start again, not just in geography, but in spirit. The space was small, but it was hers. A corner was set up with backdrops and lighting her cameras arranged with methodical care. A second-hand coffee machine hissed in the corner, filling the room with the earthy scent she had always associated with quiet focus. On the wall opposite the entrance, she hung 3 photographs, portraits taken in the moments no one thought she was watching. One showed a child with mud-streaked cheeks laughing in a Bronx park, another an elderly woman on a bench with hands folded in prayer, and the last unfinished yet was a close-up of her own reflection shadowed by the sunlight cutting through her window. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. At first the phone barely rang. Walk-ins were rare. Those who did inquire often paused awkwardly, eyes flickering with recognition as if trying to place her. Some whispered. One client, after an initial booking, canceled with a vague message. "Something's come up. She didn't need to ask. She knew. The story had spread farther than she imagined. Not the art, at least not yet, but the scandal. The viral headline, "Woman exposes cheating sister at wedding in front of 200 guests." News blogs had latched onto it. Social media platforms flooded with opinions. Some applauded her bravery, others called her vindictive. There was even a podcast episode titled "Family Secrets and Public Screens: The Iris Harrison Incident." It was surreal, and not always flattering, but she had made peace with that. Sylvia checked in weekly, encouraging her to focus on the upcoming exhibition. "Let the noise settle," she said. "It always does. And then your work will speak." And it did. The first break came when an editor from Art Perspective Quarterly reached out for an interview, not about the wedding but about her series of photos titled "Unseen." Iris hesitated, wondering if it was just another angle to sensationalize her story. But the editor surprised her. "What interests me," he said, "is the empathy in your lens. It's not just what you show, it's what you reveal by not looking away." Shortly after the article published, a quiet shift began. A retired jazz musician called to ask for a portrait. Then a mother of 3 from Queens booked a session for her family's first photograph in 10 years. A small but respected art blog listed Iris as one to watch in 2026, noting her documentarian honesty without the coldness of objectivity. Her calendar began to fill not rapidly but steadily, and more importantly, the people who came wanted to be seen by her, not just photographed. They came because they had heard that Iris didn't edit away the wrinkles or stage perfection. She captured moments' truths, the kind that stayed long after the shutter clicked. One evening, as she reviewed raw files from a shoot, her phone buzzed with a message from Sylvia. "Final gallery specs approved. Opening date set. Ready to show them." Iris smiled. She glanced again at the photo of herself on the wall, half-shadowed, half-lit. Then she turned back to her work, her fingers steady on the keyboard. She wasn't hiding anymore. The new chapter hadn't arrived with a parade or an apology. It had crept in quiet and certain like light through an open window. And it felt like home. In the days following the wedding, the Whitmore name became something of a cautionary tale in the upper circles of Boston society. What had once been whispered admiration turned swiftly into loud disapproval, and Evelyn Whitmore, once the queen of the chamber music luncheons and art fundraiser galas, found herself without a single invitation. It began with a cold silence. Calls she had grown accustomed to, weekly updates from event organizers, casual brunch confirmations, simply ceased. Then came the pointed removals. Her name was discreetly erased from the board of the Women's Heritage Society. A polite but firm letter arrived expressing that in light of recent family matters, the board had voted unanimously for her resignation. The Boston Evening Register printed a subdued but damning piece about the implosion of a once-admired socialite dynasty. Her longtime friend and social confidant, Helena Montgomery, refused to return any of her messages. Even her hairdresser canceled their standing Thursday appointments. She had always taught her daughters that appearances were everything. But no tailored dress or polished accent could shield her now. The video was everywhere. Not just the betrayal, but the gleeful cruelty caught in Evelyn's voice, speaking about Iris as if she were a stain on fine linen. It wasn't just scandal. It was evidence of character. And society was quick to turn away. Meanwhile, Reginald Whitmore faced the kind of blow that bruised more than ego, it cracked foundations. 3 major real estate development contracts were suddenly withdrawn. One, from a longtime investor based in Connecticut, cited uncertainty in leadership values. Another, a resort firm in Cape Cod, pulled out during final negotiations, stating a need to protect its brand. He tried to control the fallout, but the whispers followed every meeting. Isn't he the father? Wasn't that his daughter? What made it worse was the silence from his own household. Evelyn barely spoke, lost in her own storm of embarrassment and disbelief. And Delaney had disappeared from the house entirely. When she finally called him, her voice was hollow. "I need help," she said, and he barely recognized her. Delaney had always been the golden one, the pride of the family name, the beautiful face of their ambition. But her fall was sharper than either of her parents anticipated. Jasper had not only ended the engagement publicly, but refused to answer any further calls. His mother, Sylvia Langston, issued a swift and scathing press statement clarifying that the Langston family had no ongoing or future affiliations with the Whitmores. The jewelry firm that sponsored Delaney's last campaign dropped her overnight. Modeling agencies ghosted her. Her agent refused to return calls. She still had her condo, still had her wardrobe, still had her high heels until she checked her private savings account, the one she had created with Cole, the one that was supposed to hold enough to start over in case things with Jasper went south. The balance was 0. She blinked in disbelief and tried to log in again. Still 0. When she called Cole's number, it went straight to voicemail. The last message she received from him just a few weeks earlier had said, "Relax, beautiful. After the wedding, we'll be set." Now his social media had vanished. His apartment was empty. No mutual friends had heard from him. In a quiet, sterile moment inside her empty condo, she sat on the floor, shoes still on, and stared at the phone in her hand. Her mascara had long since smudged her breath, shallow, her thoughts darting toward something she had never dared imagine she had been played. She had played everyone, her fiancé, her family, even Iris. But in the end, the one person she thought she could control had turned out to be playing her all along. She didn't cry. Not at first. But as the hours wore on and her messages to Cole remained unread, the shock twisted into something darker. Her empire built on manipulation and beauty had crumbled in a single weekend, and there was no one left to help her pick up the pieces. Back in Boston, Evelyn stood at her kitchen window stirring a cup of tea she wouldn't drink. Her reflection in the glass looked older, smaller somehow. She had once ruled over charity auctions and tea parties, but now the silence in the room was heavier than any social defeat. She had no gallery opening to attend, no press luncheon to host, no daughter to boast about. All she had was a story playing over and over in the minds of every person who had once admired her, a story she couldn't rewrite, and a truth she couldn't silence. The Whitmore name had not just fallen, it had imploded. Iris didn't destroy a wedding. She revealed a truth that had been hidden behind designer gowns, family photos, and hollow speeches for decades. What you just witnessed wasn't revenge, it was liberation. And not just hers. Because maybe someone watching this has eaten the same dry bread. Maybe you've been pushed to the side, told to smile and stay quiet. Maybe you've wondered if speaking up is even worth it. It is. The silence that followed her video wasn't just shock. It was the sound of truth echoing in a room that never expected it. And that's why this story matters. If you stayed until the end, I want to ask you, what would you have done in Iris's shoes? Walked away quietly, or stood up and turned on the screen? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if you believe stories like this should keep being told, real, raw, unfiltered, hit that subscribe button. Because next week, we're diving into another family, another secret, and another woman who refused to stay silent. This isn't just storytelling, this is vindication, and you're going to want to see what's coming next. The rain came in sheets that afternoon, washing the Brooklyn streets in a cold, steady rhythm. Inside the studio, Iris stood at the sink rinsing developer trays while soft jazz played from the radio. The studio smelled of chemicals, coffee, and quiet. It was a rhythm she had grown to appreciate, days that moved without drama, without anyone demanding more than she was willing to give. She had just returned from hanging 3 framed prints in the gallery window, when the knock came. A soft tap, then again, and then a pause like the person on the other side was reconsidering. Iris dried her hands and walked to the door, unsure if it was a courier or perhaps a student from the community class she had begun teaching on Saturdays. But when she opened it, the air shifted. Delaney stood there drenched. Her hair clung to her face, and the designer coat she wore looked soaked through, hanging off her frame like a weight she could no longer carry. She didn't speak at first. She just stood with her hands at her sides, raindrops trailing down her cheeks, some indistinguishable from tears. Iris didn't move. She held the door but didn't widen it. "I came," Delaney said, her voice hoarse from either crying or the cold. I didn't know where else to go. Brooklyn traffic passed behind her, indifferent. Inside the studio's warmth waited, but Iris made no gesture. Why now? Iris asked, her voice steady. Delaney's lip trembled. She looked down at the wet sidewalk as if searching for words in the cracks of the concrete. Then she met Iris's eyes. Because I have nothing left to lie for. The sentence hung in the air, fragile and final. Iris studied her sister's face. The makeup was minimal smeared. The eyes weren't pleading the way they used to when she wanted something. They were tired. Stripped. I'm not asking for anything, Delaney added quickly. I need to work. I need something real. I can clean. I can run errands. You don't even have to look at me. Iris stepped back from the door just enough to let the possibility of entry exist. You clean. You don't talk. You start from zero. Delaney nodded as if she had rehearsed the moment 1,000 times. I understand. Iris turned and walked back inside, leaving the door ajar. Delaney followed, shedding her coat near the door, her shoes leaving water spots on the floor. She looked around the studio, eyes passing over the prints, the lights, the order Iris had created. She didn't touch anything. Iris handed her a mop. Start there. Delaney took it without question and began in the far corner. She didn't ask about pay. She didn't ask for a towel. She moved quietly, head down, water pooling near her feet as she worked. Iris returned to her desk, picked up her editing tablet, and resumed reviewing images. Outside, the rain softened into a drizzle, but the air in the studio remained still and thick with something unsaid. Forgiveness had not arrived. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. But consequences had. And with them the first faint shadow of change. The gallery buzzed with soft conversation, the clink of champagne glasses, and the slow footsteps of patrons moving from photograph to photograph. Portraits of Truth had drawn a larger crowd than anyone anticipated. Art critics mingled with collectors, curious locals with seasoned curators. Iris stood near the far wall, just out of the central spotlight, watching rather than basking. Each piece had been carefully chosen, faces lined with time, hands folded in grief, smiles cracked in mid-recovery. No false lighting, no perfect angles, just people as they were. Her favorite piece hung near the exit was titled Uninvited Light, a portrait of an elderly man sitting alone by a window. It had already been tagged sold. Sylvia Renner approached her with a quiet nod. You've started something, Iris. Something honest, raw, needed. Iris nodded, not out of pride but recognition. She had spent most of her life trying to be seen. Now people didn't just see her, they saw through her lens. Near the center of the gallery, a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. Iris. She turned. Jasper Langston stood a few feet away, holding a wine glass he hadn't touched. His suit was simpler than the one he had worn on what should have been his wedding day, but his posture remained upright, gracious. I didn't expect you, she said. I know. He offered a small smile. But I needed to say something. You saved me without knowing it. She didn't reply, but the look in her eyes softened. I don't think I ever truly loved Delaney, he continued. I think I loved the idea of her, of who I was supposed to be with. He paused. Watching your video, seeing the truth. It felt like being dragged out of a dream. And I woke up a freer man. She gave a faint nod. There was no need for more. He didn't linger. Your work is powerful, Iris. I hope you never stop. And with that, he moved on, vanishing into the crowd. Later, as the evening waned and the final guests filtered out, Iris stepped near the glass entrance to breathe. The city glowed beyond wet streets, reflecting gallery lights, passing taxis, muffled laughter from the bar across the avenue. That was when she saw her. Evelyn stood beneath the awning across the street. No umbrella, no entourage. Her posture was still proud, chin lifted slightly, but her expression was unreadable. She didn't wave, didn't approach, just watched. They stood like that for a long minute, two women connected by blood, divided by everything else. The mother who never praised, and the daughter who no longer waited. Iris didn't call out. She simply reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the camera she always carried. With practiced hands, she adjusted the focus, capturing the image of Evelyn from behind glass, and Rain framed by silence and the distance they had both chosen. Later, when she uploaded the image, she gave it no title at first, just a timestamp. But before printing, she added a small caption at the bottom corner. Sometimes silence says enough. And so the girl who once sat alone at family dinners, who was handed a dry piece of bread at her sister's wedding, didn't just survive the shame, they turned it into art, into truth, into liberation. Iris didn't need to scream or fight or beg for love. She simply showed the world what was real. That was enough. If you made it to this point, then maybe like Iris, you believe that silence can be powerful, that truth doesn't need permission, and that sometimes the deepest betrayals can become the clearest mirrors. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been the black sheep in your own family? Have you ever swallowed your pain just to keep the peace? Tell us below. Share your truth. Your comment might be the one that helps someone else feel less alone. If stories like this speak to something inside you, if they give you a kind of quiet strength, then don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started. There are more voices to be heard, more silence to break, and more truths to be framed. Because revenge doesn't always come with fire. Sometimes it comes with a camera.